7:11,
That's why he handed it.
Okay.
Wednesday, July 3rd. I call the regular session of the Oregon City Commission to order. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Here.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Present.
and Mayor Dan Holliday.
Here. Please stand and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we have a short agenda tonight. We have no ceremonies or proclamations. Do we have any citizen comment?
None that were given. Oh,
The ever-present
can you
Mr.
give it to
Gifford.
Mr.
No meeting is complete
mayor?
without it. Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
What can- Okay.
Tell you over the.
All right. So, Mr. Gifford, sit down and tell us what you got.
Yes, excuse me. Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners, my name is William Gifford. I live in Oregon City. I just had a couple of kudos that I wanted to share regarding our staff. Number one is I wanted to thank Chief Jim Band for coming to the Neighborhood Association picnic last night. The Hillendale Tower Vista Neighborhood Association had their annual picnic, and Chief Band was kind enough to come and talk to us about all things police-worthy. And it was informative. We learned a lot, and I just wanted to appreciate him for that. Secondly, is I had some questions about a land use issue, and I placed a phone call to planning, and Laura Turwell called back and had a long.
Turway?
I'm sorry, Turway called. What did I say?
Turwell.
Turwell. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
She was very informative and very helpful and very professional, and I just appreciate our staff. And so, I like to praise in public and criticize in private. So there you go.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Is anybody else wishing to speak? Then we will move along. Everybody okay with the agenda?
Yes.
Wait. Well, yeah, I was gonna do that when we got the consent agenda, but we're
Okay.
pulling item 8D 19-415 from the agenda.
8B,
Maybe.
I want to pull.
Mine says 8D.
Well, they are
You want
pulling
to?
8D, I want to pull 8B.
Oh, okay.
Me too.
E3.
Okay. When we get there, we'll do
Clear
that.
as mud.
So now we're on to item 6A, PC 19-072, second reading of ordinance number 18-1009, Planning Development Code amendments, including equitable housing planning file LEG 18-00001. Ms. Turway.
Thank you very much. We're just asking for the second reading tonight. If approved, the code would be effective on August 2nd of 2019. I'm here to answer any
So this
questions.
is the public hearing, so I'll open the public hearing. Anybody have any comments? Seeing none, close the public hearing. Is there a motion?
I have a question, please.
Sure.
I brought this to the attention of staff, and I just wanted to make sure that it gets on the record. So I received a couple of concerns from neighborhood residential folks regarding notification to neighborhood associations with regard to construction of other than single-family dwellings. And I know that we don't notify for single-family dwellings currently unless it's new construction in either of the districts. What I want to make sure is that the people involved in the neighborhood associations know what this change is and how it may or may not affect them. And that was the concern, was that they felt that they were not getting notification if there was something involving beyond a single-family dwelling under the new code. And I told them that I felt that staff could adequately answer that, and I discussed this with Laura ahead of time.
Okay, anybody else?
So if you would answer that for the record, that will be out there.
Sure.
Thank you.
Notification, the change that happened was for 3 and 4 plexes. We also don't notify for duplexes, that's not changing. And the rationale for the change is that there's clear and objective standards and they're not discretionary. And so that's the notification. But when we talked, we identified that as a part of the project, we're doing a lot of how-to guides. So if you want to build a 3 or 4 plex, here's all the standards and here's all the departments you need to talk to. In that guide, we'll certainly encourage applicants to contact their neighborhood association, just like we do with minor partitions where it's not required, but we encourage them to do so.
And could you also, for the record, talk about what would happen for this new construction in either Kenema or the McLaughlin Conservation District?
You would still need to go through Historic Review Board if it's required. So if it falls under our definition of a new construction, which is an addition of 30% or more of the original square footage of a structure or a new building. So there will still be a public process. We just want to, we will do the notification where there's a public process with discretion.
And then what about an internal conversion that might involve an exterior alteration?
That also, if there's exterior alterations, it would most likely require Historic Review Board review. There are some policies where you can do some easy things, but when we're talking about that type of work, you're generally talking about additions or much larger things that go beyond the scope of the policies.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
So again, is there a motion?
Yes, I'll make a motion to approve the second reading of ordinance number 18-1009, Development Code Amendments including equitable housing, planning file LED 18-000001.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Lyle Smith, seconded by Commissioner Smith. Any further discussion? Mr. Kabizman?
Ordinance number 18-1009, an ordinance of the City of Oregon City adopting amendments to Oregon City Municipal Code Title II, Administration and Personnel, Title III, Revenue and Finance, Title 12, Streets, Sidewalks, and Public Places, Title 13, Public Services, Title 14, Annexations, Title 15, Buildings and Construction, Title 16, Land Divisions, and Title 17, Zoning.
Call roll, please.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
and Mayor Holliday.
Aye.
The ayes have it and the motion has passed.
Okay, moving on. Under general business, 19-412, appraisal and sale of 320 Warren Milling Avenue, occupied by the Police Department, Code Enforcement, Municipal Court, Chief Band.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. This is not I'm not asking for a decision about this, just sharing some information with you, getting your thoughts, if you have any, about our plan to sell the building. It's pretty straightforward. Most of the information is in what I put into the what you have in front of you. We've had a lot of interest for a long time about the property. People want to buy it. And not that long ago, I had somebody say, hey, get an appraisal and we'll just buy it for that. And I've looked into commercial real estate that you pay a broker the same amount that you pay if you're selling your home, 5 to 6%. So I reached out to Mr. Kabizman. We had a conversation about, could we just sell this by owner and save, it's at least $150,000. Our last appraisal is over $3 million. So if we can take a whack at selling it on our own, Mr. Kabizman said it wouldn't be a problem at all. If we can save $150,000, I want to do it.
Well,
So-
yeah, I would say that when we get to the time, if we're, a year away or whatever it is, that we put it out as an RFP and just let, the development community see what it is and send us a proposal.
Well, our plan is to do it pretty quick here. And the reason is it's kind of a variable, an important variable that our budget it's a large piece of our budget, and we don't want to wait until we're ready to move in. And so we want to do it now. The agreement would include leaseback terms of some kind.
Yeah.
So that's our plan. That will.
But I want to put it out to the wider community. I don't want to just pick somebody that, like the guy who said, I'll just buy it for the appraised value.
And that's exactly why we're not doing that, is to give everybody a shot at it.
Sure.
And so.
Okay. Questions?
Yes, I agree with you that I think we should put out an RFP or an RFQ, or at least request for qualifications. The one thing I would ask is that I think the report needs to be amended. I have a concern about, there was no mention of the wetland area that's behind, and at one time, the plan was going to be, the police department and the library were going to be there. This was proposed by former Community Development Director John Block, and he had recommended that we use the wetland area for storm drainage and a demonstration project, and it wouldn't go away. There was no mention in this report, and I read the whole thing about that area and that it's sensitive, and that, we better not have anybody messing around with it and they should utilize it in their project. So I really think the report needs to be amended to make that area back there. I mean, you hear the crickets and everything and the frogs and all that back there. I mean, you can hear them, they're loud and clear. And there was no mention in the report. So that's why I think the report needs an amendment or an addendum, because I don't want somebody walking into this and going, well, I didn't know that was there. And staff confirmed that it is a wetland.
Yeah, we're aware that it is.
Well, yeah,
We'll make sure
it's
that
just
any
not in
potential
here.
purchaser
And
would
this is
know that.
somebody who would be looking at this going, oh, everything looks great.
I just have one quick question. Have we done a for sale by owner before? Is this uncharted territory?
I think
It's, I'm trying to remember if we have done a for sale by owner without I'm fairly certain we have. I can't put my finger on it, immediately, but it's very familiar and, you know,
Well, we're not
it's
using
not.
brokers for 10th of Main and 12th of Main, are we? We took those signs down and they were coming to Eric Underwood, not to a realtor.
I don't know the answer to, I know we've used brokers before.
I'm not recalling my work.
I'm trying to think of a sale without one.
Let's put it this way, Mr. Weisman, do you feel comfortable that we could handle that?
Yeah, I feel
In-house?
very comfortable handling that in-house. The big issue with the brokers is their ability to connect buyers and sellers and their knowledge of the area and who's interested in what.
I think if we
And
put it
that's-
out in the Business Journal and a couple other places, that we would have plenty of interest.
Well, and worst case scenario, we put it out there, we don't get offers that we want, we go, hey, let's change gears, it's been a month, let's hire a broker.
Yeah.
We at least take a shot at it.
All right?
Okay.
Does anybody on staff have the ability to write up an RFQ or an RFP of like a 1 or 2 page thing?
We do it all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to see a
And-
draft of that.
If there is a sale that comes through, there will have to be a public hearing before this.
Time out. I've got a commissioner asking to see a draft of the RFP or the RFQ. Is this something that all of the commission wants to see?
I don't think so. All we really want to make sure is if Commissioner McGriff's concerns about the wetland are taken into account, I don't really care who buys it, because it's gonna be commercial of some kind, right?
Yeah,
That's zone general
It's,
commercial.
yeah. What's the zoning?
I can write up a summary of the land use and all the issues and provide it to Chief Band, so he
Perfect.
can give that to the buyers.
All right,
Yeah, like I said, an addendum of some
then
sort.
we're gonna move on.
Yeah, I can work with you to take a look at it. On.
7B, 19-396, resolution 19-18, revocable permanent obstruction in the right-of-way at 413 4th Avenue. Mr. Lewis, where is Mr. Lewis? There he is.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. So this item came before you last week, and it was pulled from the consent agenda, and the request was for additional information. So we've added additional information in the packet for you, but I'll go through it. We're asking you to approve Resolution 19-18 to allow a revocable permit obstruction in the right-of-way for retaining walls, stairs, and walkways, all associated with a single-family home in the Kenema neighborhood. And it's encroaching into the right-of-way in infill development at 413 4th Avenue. So some of the information that was brought before you last time was that, staff had looked at the site and had been working with the applicant. The applicant, by the way, and 2 consultants, including a civil engineer and a geotechnical engineer here in the audience, if we've got questions for them. But bottom line is the challenge in Kenema is 60-foot right-of-ways and basically a 20-foot roadway. So transitioning from that roadway grade, especially on steeper lots, requires some kind of development in many cases to figure out how to transition from where the house frontage would be to the roadway. And that's kind of what we're seeing in this case, which is really development of grading such that they can get a driveway, walkway in the, between the roadway and the house.
This is the cottage development?
No, this is not the cottage homes. This is an undeveloped lot at the intersection of 4th and Miller.
Oh,
which
okay,
is-
okay,
which is
now I know.
close, which is close, but to the
Sure.
cottage homes, catty corner, if you will, but there's, nothing has happened on the property other than a lot of, the geologic hazards review and the historic review. So those items were the concerns that I heard from you last time, was that, well, are we making a decision before the geologic hazards were considered or before the Historic Review Board had considered this. So in here, there is indication of mostly the timeline for the Historic Review Board, and the geologic hazards is a staff review, and I included that information that the geologist provided, which is in aligned with our code requirements for geologic hazards and approval for that. So if you've got questions for me or the applicant, I'll do my best.
I suppose this one concerns me in a number of ways. I looked at all the geology and the soils and everything, but that's not for me to comment upon. The thing is, everything we do is not standalone, and there's a statement in here about, in the staff report, the picket fence designed for the top of the wall protection does not require HRB review because it meets the HRB policies and has been approved by staff. So are you telling me that any picket fence that's in a right-of-way is not reviewable? Because we got other issues down there that we're gonna have to deal with that very issue.
The letter was meant to talk about the design of the picket fence as it relates to Historic Review Board Overlay District. It would still require the same, obviously, permanent obstruction right-of-way permits. So it's just one of the many layers of review that has to happen. Historic Review Board has policies that allow staff to approve fences if they meet the height and material requirements.
And remember, this is revocable. So anytime, the city can go back and go, hey, we need that back, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're talking about revoking a retaining wall, right? I mean,
Retaining wall.
we're not talking about a wood fence that's in the right of way. We're talking about something that's gonna affect the structure of the house. So I don't think there's, I mean,
Right.
it'd have to be dire circumstances for us to say we want to revoke that. My concern is the sentence before that one, and not about the picket fence, but it does say, within the right-of-way, there are no restrictions on wall height or fence height. And so my question is, does the proposed wall height actually meet the height of the historic requirement for fences or walls in the historic district? I know it doesn't, clearly you're stating it doesn't have to abide by any other restrictions, but I'm afraid that if we approve this, that we're gonna get complaints for the next 10 years that they built a wall that was 6 feet high and walls were only supposed to be 4 feet in the historic I mean, I'm sure my numbers are off, but I'm just using that as an example. Can you comment on that?
The retaining wall was within the Historic Review Board package, and it was reviewed by the Historic Review Board. The retaining wall was, not the picket fence on top. The heights for retaining walls are not in our historic section. They're in our general provisions section of our code, so they apply equally across the city, and they don't apply to right-of-way as you identified. If they're not in the right-of-way, what it says is between the front of a building and the right-of-way, it's 3.5 feet tall. And so this is more than 3.5 feet tall? It is more than 3.5 feet tall. The other thing to recognize about this one is that it's sub-grade. So the purpose of fence heights is to, for aesthetics, so you don't have large blank walls that are unsightly. In this case, it's below you if you're standing in the right of way. But
I think I'm going to respectfully disagree that it doesn't apply. My understanding is in zoning, the more restrictive code is the one that's applicable. So in my opinion, the Historic Review Board requirements for fences, walls, and whatever applies before the thing in the right-of-way. Here's my other concern. I agree with the question that Rachel is asking, but my concern is that when this came in, did the staff or the applicant look at any other way to do this so they would not have to encroach into the right-of-way? That is my question. It's like, why did they go to the right-of-way, first of all, to say that this was the only option? What other options are available or could be available that they don't have to be in the right-of-way?
So all the history on this one, it dates back to 2017. I don't know all that detail, but what I can tell you is based on the topography of the roadway. Again, we're talking about a 20-foot roadway that's traditional and typical for Kenema, where the property line sits several feet off that horizontally off that roadway and vertically down the slope,
So you're
down
talking
slope.
about the built part is only 20 feet wide, but the right-of-way is wider,
Much
correct?
wider,
Yes.
much wider. So really just even setback requirements on the house feels very much, even if the house is on the property line, it's set off far from the street. So, and the fact that you just got this physical elevation change that I don't know what else you could do to get the kind of access that you need to that property.
I don't either. That's why I went over there and I looked at it and I thought, well, number one, it isn't for me to judge, but it looks like it's not really a super good buildable lot. There's, as you know, Kanema was platted in a dark closet, in my opinion, because they didn't take into account any of the topography, so they just threw some lines on a map and said, oh, here's a lot. Well, that doesn't mean, just because it's on a plat means that you can actually build it. And so how do you build something on an area like that that doesn't take into consideration the topography instead of making all these retaining walls and everything? So I just have a concern about giving up public property. Because as she says, it's not revocable technically. Once that retaining wall is there,
That's true.
it's not going to get revoked.
I would agree with that.
So I wanna
Even
be-
though that's the title of the.
I know.
of it, it's a significant facility. Obviously, if we were proposing a much wider public roadway through there, or the need for utility lines in that area, we could consider revoking this, right? Because of the way it's written, we could consider doing that.
And having the
That would be a
house
heavy
around.
lift though for a private property owner, right? And likely require a regrading of the roadway. And so that's not the intent here, is to ever have to revoke that. This is a permanent facility in the right of way. But my point is that there isn't a feasible way to transition to the property line where they actually have to build the building.
I'd like to hear from the applicant.
Okay? I'm not sure if you want to come up and speak, or you want one of your consultants to represent, but.
Yeah, I want to know about the technical part. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer that. If there's the engineer
You need to
guys here.
state your name and your city of residence.
My name's Dave Green. I'm the applicant on the property, and I do have available for technical questions the geotechnical engineer and the civil engineer on the
I'd
project.
rather to have the civil engineer come up. I don't think the
Okay.
geotech is really it.
Dan Simmons is the civil engineer. And just a little background on the property. If you look at the dates, you'll see that this has been a long-term process to glean approval on this. Before I purchased the lot, I did do a pre-app to determine the feasibility. Will this be a building lot in the eyes of the city and the building department and so forth? And the results of that pre-app was, yes, it's a building lot. If you meet the conditions of development, we will give you a building permit. So that was basically the summary of that pre-app. Based on that, I did make my offer on the property and purchase it. Went through the HRB procedures, and then when we moved into the geological hazards, and as Laura mentioned, and I think it's in your packet of materials, the original architectural plot plan is part of that does show the retaining walls, basically the design as it's reflected now. Once it went to Dan's firm for civil engineering and developed the engineering for that, they did that based on the results of the geotechnical investigations and so forth, and did come up with a viable design to address Denise McGriff's concerns. As John mentioned, the developed roadway is about 24 feet from the property line. So we have a reduced setback on the front of the building to essentially 1 foot back from the property line. But that leaves this gulf to get to the residents, either vehicle or pedestrian access through that portion of right-of-way, which drops precipitously, you might say, probably about 10 feet in that 24 feet. So there would have to be some type of development in that right-of-way to simply access the structure. The development we proposed, we felt was most right-of-way appropriate materials with fill, ultra block construction and so forth, as opposed to a structure like a bridge or whatever. And in view of the fact that that had been approved previously by the HRB, if we were to redesign and go to some sort of a bridge, then we would be back to an HRB review again to address, you might say, the historical context of that type of development with the rails and so forth that would be required. So based on that, the city's reviews have been exhaustive and thorough, and in the abundance of caution, you may notice that comments about geofoam fill and so forth, because of concern about loading on the hill and so forth, the city's peer review geotech wanted to err much on the side of caution, and so with that in mind, we agreed to use foam fill, which is much lighter, in front of the house to accomplish that, to minimize any possibility of disturbing the hillside. We're trying to very much make the development consistent with the existing topography and so forth. So I think Dan and Doug have bent over backwards and done an excellent job on responding to the concerns and coming up with a design that errs considerably on the side of safety. And I would turn over to Dan to give you any particulars that might set your mind at ease.
Dave gave a good background, framework for how the process has gone.
First name and,
My name's Dan Simmons,
okay.
civil engineer. Some of the things that came out of geological hazard review put additional requirements on the project that we thought were already approved under the geological hazard review. So when we got into the technical phase, they wanted to make sure we had as light a footprint as possible. We've done minimal grading on the site, with the exception of getting from the edge of the paved roadway to the edge of the garage and the front door. And within that zone, we've gone further to provide the geofoam fill in the right of way, which is a very lightweight product compared to structural fill.
Sure.
And that's all designed to reduce the impact to the existing slope.
You know, I read that, and it appears to be a fairly highly technical build, because you have to account for supersaturation of the soils and drainage. You have to account for depth of pilings to get stability. You've got a number of things that make this, to me, a challenging build. But my only concern tonight is, like there's a drawing that shows a ultra block retaining wall. How far does that encroach upon the city's right-of-way?
There is a section in the plan set, I don't know where it's got access
I mean, I
to
see
that.
an end of property line, EOP.
Okay. Edge
Yeah,
buffer.
I'm gonna estimate that's 16 to 18 feet,
Into the right-of-way?
yes.
See, my concern is that we have to deal with other issues down there that involve encroachment in the right-of-way. I want to be consistent in the application of any vote that I cast.
Well, I think we are, because the fact is that, we've already, you're not gonna be able to widen that road, because there's nowhere to widen it at. And, depending on the different kinds of buildings that are on any given street in Kenema, many of them are built right up against, some of them are probably built on the right of way. If you go back into
So
the street.
the neighboring parcel, one on the other side of Miller Street, is a, clear, similar example, I would say. I don't know that they use the fill that's being proposed here, but there's another example where most of their driveway, their garage, if you remember the area, it's really kind of across from
driven
the,
it.
it's really across from the cottage homes, the excavation right there. So right there, there's their driveway and that retaining wall that they have that's pretty much along the edge of the road. There's enough room to park a car, barely. It's one wheel is kind of in the pavement, and the other wheel's off, but there's an opportunity to park up top there. But then there's a retaining wall and a drive aisle down there that gets kind of between the garage. And so very similar in
Let me
terms
ask
of-
this question. So have we done this in Kenema before?
Encroachment permits?
Yeah.
Yes, both through this process, and if you look at Kenema, there's an abundance of encroachments that are not approved. Even on this, there's a drawing sheet that shows buildings in the right of way. I mean, I think Denise that said, you know, it has a history of the plat probably going that far back. It does have a history of that, and I'm not suggesting we should repeat that. We're trying to do a much better job of getting these on, getting approved through you. I'd like to see this happen before we go to the HRB and before we
I
go
would
through the
agree.
geologic hazards. I totally feel
That's
that
the
way,
wrong-
and I think
yeah.
we're talking about that internally, but there's also lots of times you don't know at that point in the game really much about the design. So it's kind of like, how early in the process can you ask so that the applicant isn't going through multiple processes, a lot of design fees, and then coming to this point where, well, all that, if the commission were to approve this encroachment, then, that would be a problem. And I'm not sure where we'd go from there.
I'd like to add that when you have less encroachment into the right-of-way with the retaining wall to provide access, because of the slope, it becomes much, much taller and much more massive a structure. And we have height limitations on the walls we're trying to stay close to. We're trying to minimize the amount of weight we're putting on the hillside. If you put the wall farther towards the right-of-way, away from the center line, then it just gets taller and gets heavier. And so this project's been a real balancing act between the planning's concerns and the technical concerns and still providing access between what exists as a roadway and the front door that he's put 1 foot off the property line, so it doesn't push the development even further down the hill.
So the point I want to make here is that these guys have gone through staff a whole bunch of times and worked through all of the technical issues, which I don't believe any of us are qualified to talk about. And number two, that, all over Kenema, there are examples of literally houses built in the right-of-way or partially built in the right-of-way, depending on how you look at that. If you measured it exactly 60 feet or 30 feet on either side of center, I don't know that there's anything here there's certainly nothing here that would prevent me from voting yes on this project.
Back to Commissioner McGriff's question, was there an alternative design that did not require moving into the right-of-way?
Well, I'm not
Or as you said, it just required taller walls?
We looked at several alternatives. One would be to build a bridge structure, but that's even more intrusive, in my opinion, because it's harder to modify later if the city does want to come through and widen the street or something. But this particular approach is compatible with the future street widening as long as it's not too extreme.
Well, the only reason I asked the question is I'd like to be sure that there weren't other alternatives, because sometimes people go, not you, but people go to the easiest thing that they think might work when there may be other solutions. I guess the other concern is, I have a concern about the retaining wall with the fence on top, because I don't want to see that the fence policy, which the HRB just went through exhaustive review, I don't want to see this be out of conformance with that. As far as I'm concerned, your retaining wall and you add something on that doesn't meet the height, doesn't meet that policy, in my
Well, you've
opinion.
got to understand there's a building code requirement. Whenever you have a fall of more than 30 inches vertically, or more than 30 inches 3 foot away from the edge of the wall due to the slope, then the building code kicks in. You have to have a guardrail. We're not designing this as a vehicle guardrail. This is a pedestrian guardrail so that some kids don't walk along the top of the wall and then have an opportunity to topple.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to see it meet the policy, because again, it's not your fault. We have other issues in that district where the fences are too high. So unless there's some exception that we're making for this, that we can say it only applies to this situation, I don't want this to become the rule. And somebody come back and say, oh, well, you let them put X, Y, Z here and it doesn't meet the fence policy. So, I want to be consistent, and I want the policy to apply consistently through the district.
So, Mr. Kabizman, I'm going to ask you one of those questions that you hate me asking.
And I'll give you the answer I know you love.
Depends.
Which takes precedence, the building code or the HRB policy?
I believe the answer, they both do. You've got to comply with both. So, I don't think there's a precedence issue, but how that works out in this case,
But the building code is requiring a fence or something to prevent somebody from walking over and falling off the cliff. And it seems to me that if it's going to be in the public right of way, we want to make sure that is there because, sometime down the road, if there was some litigation, not only would it be the property owner, but it would also be the city that would probably have some liability there.
That's actually a question on my mind. if the soil were to move, if this became an uninhabitable dwelling after it was built, who's on the hook for that? By allowing them to build? Are you on the hook by saying it's a feasible building area? Is the city on the hook on a lawsuit like we had the Knoll Creek Canyon problems?
I don't know anything about that project.
Well, I'm just talking in general. If you say this is buildable under these, your professional opinion is this is buildable under these terms, and in fact, the building then fails later because for whatever, soil saturation or that this is not sufficient to guarantee a stable building platform. Are you liable in court for that? Are we liable in court?
me for it, I guess I am.
Can I,
Sir.
can I address that?
Yeah,
And
please
I'd like
do.
to address Denise's comments too.
Yeah. Is the city liable for that?
Beg your pardon?
Are we liable for that, for issuing you a building permit with all the information?
It would appear not, because I've signed some pretty stringent indemnification agreements for the city. In fact, I guess in my mind, I'm wondering why there's so much oversight from the city when I really sign complete indemnification, and yet the design professionals are insured for design.
Errors and omissions.
Yes, exactly. So do I have a more clear legal path toward the city or towards him? He would squirm, but I have a more clear legal path towards him because I've signed indemnification agreements with the city.
I think we've gotten way into the weeds. So
And I would-
Denise, go ahead.
I would like to just briefly address, number one, as far as the easy path, if the path summary were presented, you will see I've not taken an easy path, and I
Oh,
think
no, I
Laura
know
can attest to that.
I didn't say you, I said
Yes,
other.
no, but regarding the picket fence, because of the fact the requirement of the height of the wall is a visual appearance for what you see, because these slope down from the right of way. My understanding is the prevailing requirement is basically what you see of the wall, which you'll only see basically curb height to mount. Then you need some sort of a pedestrian guardrail where you have this 30-inch or greater drop. There really is nothing specifically addressing pedestrian guardrails per se that I can find in the design guidelines for the historic district. There's talk about rails, which would be around decks and so forth around the building, but not in this specific. So I did make some inquiries. What are we looking at? And it would seem that the fence design is the prevailing architectural design that controls. So what we are providing for there is a picket fence, which is an approved style in the historic district that has the robust capacity for the pedestrian guardrail function. So what you see from the street is basically where those drop-offs occur, a 3-foot-high picket fence, which would be very typical in the historic neighborhood. So that's what we're.
I'm just trying to find it in the staff report so I can look at the picture of it again, because I did not print it out.
I have an option for you if you're concerned about the overall height.
I'm just trying to find the page that it's on, where
So
it showed it.
I'm going to ask
real
this
quick.
question because it seems to me we're getting way outside of what the commission is supposed to do.
It's all related. I didn't find it there. I didn't find it there, Rocky, sorry. I didn't find it in the report. I'm looking for it. John, I'm trying to find your drawing that you showed, that you submitted.
Yeah,
the retaining.
I'm looking at
So getting
Laura's.
back to what I was saying, staff has thoroughly reviewed this project, correct?
We will assure that there's staff review and,
But I mean, just to get us to this point, you guys have done a whole bunch of review, right?
Yes.
yes.
And you don't anticipate needing, any time in the foreseeable future, needing this right of way for city projects?
That's true.
Then I don't see why we need to talk about this anymore. We have professional staff that we depend on. The client has gotten, professional engineers to look at this stuff. We're not supposed to be in the position of getting this deep in the weeds on a particular project for something as simple as a revocable right-of-way. So if somebody has something that's more germane to the conversation, then is there a motion?
I still can't find it.
Sorry, turn my mic on. just in general, not specific to this property, I would like for us to be cognizant in the future about that line in the staff report that says things within the right of way don't have to meet other guidelines. That may be the case, but it would be good for us to know, like, are we going up outside of the general precedent of the rules of this neighborhood by 4 feet? Or are we talking about the proposed fence is 6 inches or a foot higher than what is the standard in the neighborhood? Like, that's my biggest concern at this point, is that, you know, I don't want to create this where we have to say, well, this isn't a code enforcement issue because it's in the right of way, and half the stuff down there is in the right of way. So there's got to be some balance there between HRB policies in historic neighborhoods and stuff that's built in the right of way that clearly has some exception rules. So
Yeah,
you have
and there's
something to
two
say?
provisions, I think, perhaps we could have said that a lot more clear.
Okay.
There is height requirements in 1754-100 of our code. The new code amendments clearly identify right-of-way versus not right-of-way. And then there's also historic review board. And so the retaining wall is subject to historic review board and did go before them. What the provision is saying is that a 3.5 foot tall picket fence is okay to do as a type 1 approval, and so we can do that. So they still do have to meet both, but we'll clarify that in the future.
Commissioner McGriff, you got something?
No, I still can't find the picture of it.
So is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 19-18, revocable permanent obstruction in the right of way at 413 4th Avenue.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Lyle Smith, seconded by Commissioner Smith. Is there further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Abstain.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
No.
and Mayor Holliday.
Aye.
Motion, the ayes have it and the motion passes.
Okay, we're gonna pull a couple things off the consent agenda. One, Chief Band asked that the 19-415 Resolution 1928 on alarms fees be pulled. And then several of us want to pull and look at this Resolution 19-17, updating policy for cross-street banners and banners on light poles. So we'll pull that out and we'll discuss that after we have the motion to approve the rest of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to that
I
effect?
so move that we approve the remainder of the consent agenda.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
and Mayor Holliday.
Aye.
The ayes have it and the motion passes.
Okay, so Mr. Lewis,
Okay, so we're on the.
19-17, updating the policy for cross-street banners and banners on the light poles.
Okay, so I think you have something in paper form because you can't see it on your screens, but I put this together today. Thank you, Commissioner Lyle Smith, for letting me know you were going to pull this. And I did look at the revised policy and the red line policy, and clearly there's a problem there in that it's my take, and staff that were helping me with this aren't here right now, but or they're on vacation right now. But I was trying to figure out what happened, and the only thing I can think of is we got an older version of red lines, or a version of red lines that doesn't reflect everything that we changed. So I apologize for that. We'll definitely bring this back with that red line version so you can see that. But I put this little document together hoping that you would get a better understanding of why we're making the changes. So generally, we're making the changes in an effort to make things easier for applicants to use mostly our streetlight banner arms. So I'll just go through them line item by line item. Allowable installation zones. In the policy we had before, we limited where banners could go on banner arms to 4 zones: Washington Street, Main Street, 7th Street, and a section of Malala, really between Holmes Lane and 7th Street. And at the time, we were struggling with lots of requests and trying to figure out how to manipulate those and how to do those, manage those in a way. But I think we went a little too far with that requirement. So, and we have lots of banner arms in town now that are outside of those zones. So we opened the opportunity for use of those banner arms to be pretty much citywide. There's exceptions to that, but I'll show you. Well, there are actually attached some maps here that I'll talk about. But so we eliminated the zones. The other thing about the zones was we were only allowing an applicant to put banners in one zone, right? So if you were the downtown district, you pretty much wanted that one zone, but you would like to have your event kind of posted across the city. And so that was challenging. Farmers market, you know, all the users that we have had the same problem. They were required to sit with this one zone, whether it be Washington Street. Okay, you can put your banners there, but you can't put them on Main Street. So we think we've made that a little bit more user friendly. What we call the banner installation contract period, and this is both between the contract period and the maximum days a banner can be in place. It seemed to me, even in our revised version, as I reread that again, kind of scrutinizing it, there's a little confusion there. But the installation period is really what you're applying for when you first submit your application. And so our existing policy allowed for 30 days, and we have events that need much longer periods of time. In fact, a lot of our events are year-long, whether it's acknowledgement of the Main Street Award and, you know, its program or farmers market. They need more than 30 days, or they want more than 30 days. And so we pushed that out to 6 months. Maximum days banners can stay in place. Well, before it was 90 days, we're calling it 12 months or a year. So for, again, for the DOCA, when they kind of published theirs, they bought those banners for the entire year. Their intent was to have them up for the entire year, and yet we had this policy that limited it to 90 days. So, you know, are there other banners that we want up, that we won't want up for a year? Yes, definitely. So we'll have to work through those, but the way it's written right now is up to 6 months, and you can request more.
So one question, so you're talking about eliminating the zones.
Yep.
So is there's going to be some kind of limitation on, because I mean, if Downtown Oregon City Association takes the banners for an entire year.
Right.
So can we limit the, you know, have some kind of sideboards on that so that we might have simultaneously 2 or 3 different users of these banners?
Yeah, well, I mean, so far our users don't see that kind of value in consuming all those spaces. And I'll show you in the maps just an example of that. But right now we're mapping, and we're asking the applicant to designate where they would like to be, but yet we still have the authority to be able to say, well, that's too much to ask, right? So we feel like we've got the ability to manage that. So we are.
Now we're wading into the deep, dark cesspool of subjectivity. So it seems to me that you need to have some hard numbers on, you know, say you can have 20 banner locations for 90 days or whatever the case is. So that somebody, well, you know, you're playing favors to Downtown Oregon City Association, and you know, the Oregon City Baseball Club or whatever, you know, so I hate to see anything where subjectivity on the behalf of staff is there. Commissioner Smith? Oh, sorry.
Well, yeah, there has to be some, either you stay with the 30 days and allow that to be renewed each time. I guess you're kind of saying that even where we're at now, there's banner spaces available even for these one weekend events. The problem is if we write this and change it and then that changes, then we come back and we have to change this again. So to me, there needs to be the flexibility for having, you know, designated spaces for whole year banners and some designated spaces probably for short term, you know, we're having an event next month, it's gonna be up for a month, that's it. Without having to require Downtown to take their year-long banners down to put one thing up. There has to be a middle ground there, I think. And I don't know if that's designating certain uses for year-round, certain uses, certain spaces for more rotated, or if I don't know, there's gotta be some other way of doing it.
Well, and I'm trying to think how best to do that without kind of,
Right.
again, overcomplicating it or.
So here,
or
let me help you out.
Because the trails,
Because I think this is too important a subject, and there are too many questions and not enough answers tonight. I think what I'd like to do is schedule this for a work session.
Yeah.
So that you and I and the rest of the commission and Tony can have, a more robust conversation about this particular item. Is there any?
No, I agree with that completely. I mean, as written, the person could monopolize the site with a 6-month and a 6-month renewal. There has to be a different way.
the other question I would have, did the grant get funded for the Metro grant for the banner? It did. So what's the timeline for that being?
It's on, well, the
Is it this summer?
intent is to use that grant funding and some design funding to come up with a design. And that work with an artist. We're required to go through kind of an RFP process to get that solicited.
RFQ would be something.
Well,
Nothing happens in 2 months here.
Yeah.
my point is too, because a lot of this is crossing out the old PG stuff, which means we're gonna have to insert the new facility into this
Well, so,
same metrics too. So why wouldn't we wait and do that all when that gets installed?
so the PGE option's no longer an option.
No, I know. So we've crossed that out in the red lines, which I means, once we have our own facility, I'm assuming we're gonna reference that in here too.
We would have to reference that.
Right, so
We
my
have
point
to
is,
pick a
why
location.
wouldn't we be going through that when that's installed? If we're
Well-
gonna have to come back to that and then insert it into this later, once that is installed, anyway.
Well, it is a policy. It's relatively easy to revise. And so we're trying to get to where we're really at with managing our banners
Right.
today, which is very similar to what this is saying. So,
Okay, but,
so we're trying to get, so we can bring back in a work session.
yes.
I just trying to align the changes with when that new Cross Street banner location is installed.
Well, that
It's
was
a
my
pretty
point.
long period of time.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
So we have time to look at this. If there's no objection, we'll just move on.
Just had a question, if I may, Dan.
Go.
I think it might be helpful to use an actual example. So I was going to suggest, I know we want to start putting stuff up regarding the 175th. So maybe that could be like an actual example, because I'm kind of surprised we don't have anything up yet. And we,
it's up,
those
it's been
of,
up for months.
well, not on the banner arms.
Yes, they've been up for months, since the beginning of the year.
Well, yeah, but people that I've talked to said, I saw them, but, when is it? And I said, well, it's in August and, but anyway,
Well, that's a content issue.
yeah.
So there's
Right.
quite a few 175th banners
For that.
up right now.
Not for the specific
They're,
event.
they're pretty much at all the entryways.
Right.
Okay, we're
So anyway, yeah, that sounds
completely off track now. So we're gonna move on. Mr. Manager, you have anything for us?
I think were we going to address the other issue pulled from the consent, or are we just going to have us bring that back?
Minutes what?
My issues have been resolved for 8D. I
Okay,
think
so
you-
we'll
you
just
all
bring
were-
that back.
you can
We had
bring
some
that back.
corrections that we needed to make in the
Yeah.
verbiage on that.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, go.
Then communications, Mr. Manager.
Just two quick updates for you. I just wanted to give you an update in case John Lewis and I met with Director Geis from Water Environmental Services to talk about the proposed SDC increase that was adopted by the WES board last Thursday. They were pretty significant. It was about 125% increase on the system development charge rate that's applicable to Tri-City. Our existing rate is $3,490 per EDU. It's going to go to $7,850 on August 1st. So it did go, met with Mr. Geis. There are some areas where we can certainly improve communication between the agencies as it relates to master planning methodology and CIP, capital improvement plan list, and system development charges. And we've agreed to try to work on that moving forward. I did testify before the the West Board.
West Board, which is the Board of County Commissioners.
Yeah, so, tried to lay out, just if there was a more thoughtful way to do this. When we've faced SDC system development charge increases before that were significant, we've tried to, implement them over multiple years. So I would fully expect that there are going to be folks in the development community who have applications that are in or going through land use or going through engineering review who have not submitted building permits yet, that if they submit on August 1st or after, the system development charge associated with that, especially on a commercial development, is going to be significantly higher, and you will hear about it. We will be directing them and answering their questions and directing them to Wes to respond as to what that increase is.
Can we make sure that we somehow notify any of those folks that are in the process but haven't filed their actual building permits yet? Is there a way to, it's probably not easy, but is there a reasonable way to get that message out to those folks so they could get their permits in prior to August 1st?
We will do our best.
Okay.
But we
That's
might
all I
not miss
asked.
them all.
I'm going to comment.
So I just wanted to make you aware of that in case you started to hear anything related to that. Feel free to send them to either myself or
Commissioner
John
O'Donnell
Lewis.
has a comment he'd like to make.
Well, just simply that I find that action by West unconscionable and in an era when we're looking at affordable housing and the impacts on it, and in an era when we are trying to develop employment opportunities and the impact on a non-residential business is going to be huge. And I still think, I wonder about it because I don't want to say confronted, but I asked another mayor who participated in this decision, and his understanding was not that it was 125%. So I hope these people that voted for it, including people from our own community that sat on that board, I hope they realize the impact of what they've done. End of story.
Well, and I think more importantly than that, the disrespect that Wes and the county have shown us by not even mentioning this to us prior to, them voting on it. I mean, we had virtually, I didn't know anything about it until, I think it was Mr. Lewis or you called me and said, hey, this is going to be up at the county's meeting. And, it goes back to that same thing we've been talking about West and Tri-City Plant for a long time, and that is we should have a voice in the governance of that program if they're going to be able to levy, quote, taxes on our citizens.
So how do we do that, and when do we have that next
Well, we're-
discussion again? Because we need to.
And what do we do in the interim?
We're currently right about to start the Oregon Consensus process. So we're actually I think we're doing a doodle poll I've already done, so I expect to hear back from Mr. Odell at Oregon Consensus next week to give us a time frame for when that process is going to start. It's going to take some time. I would still like us to have a serious discussion about discontinuing paying the county's or Wes's rate differential. We can keep that money in an escrow account, but I would like to use that as leverage in the process of negotiating somewhere we have some control, some voting interest in what decisions Wes makes.
Well, I'd be in favor of that discussion.
I'm pretty sure Commissioner Smith is.
Absolutely.
Yep.
One thing that I did notice in their budget was the differential. They do the same thing. So Happy Valley now has a right-of-way fee, so does Gladstone.
I don't care. I don't think it's
remember.
legal.
They're applying that differential to those agencies too. That's all I wanted to say.
But their incremental increase was not ours, was it? I mean, we had the largest single.
Oh, no, those are two different issues.
Okay.
So they did their own study and,
Yeah, I know.
pulled it out of thin air or whatever and decided, because the fact is CCSD's rates only went up by a couple $100, correct?
3%.
Which is why,
That is
yeah,
correct.
Yes,
that's why you got that answer.
right.
So
Commissioner
so what
Griffin.
other jurisdictions are affected by this?
By what?
Tri-City would be Gladstone, Oregon City, and Westland. The rate,
The traditional.
renewed rate one, which used to be Tri-City.
Right, okay.
But
So
actually, I'm
what is-
sorry. Go ahead.
What is the response from those two jurisdictions?
Well,
In terms of growth opportunities,
No,
they're
I mean in
limited
terms of
compared
their
to us.
response to this, because I think the best way to approach this is that we have the three cities go in as a united front saying, hey, what's,
And we have that in the governance discussion. The problem is we have really no authority to make it, or no available way to make any impression on Wes. They decide what they're going to do and they do it, and we have no voting and we have no way to influence that
but it's a
decision.
special district, correct?
effectively, the county has merged CCSD1 and Tri-Cities.
Right, but it's a special district as a governing body, right?
Right,
It's a
but,
county-
but the Board of County Commissioners is the governing board of Wes. And they're also the governing board of Tri-Cities, and they're also the governing board of CCSD1.
Okay, so let me ask Bill one more question. So what is the obligation of a special district to its constituents in terms of notice and what they're doing? Isn't there supposed to be a transparent and open process and the whole 9 yards?
Yes, there is an obligation for transparency and notice. The notice, I haven't looked into that, but the notice for changes in SDCs is not that significant. The legal obligation, whether how far they should do is another question.
Well,
But
I
as-
guess the question I would have in opposing this is, did they cross all of their Ts and dot their Is? Because if they didn't, then, we should add that to our objections,
Yes.
in addition to many other things.
I don't disagree. I've been fighting this issue for 4.5 years of my term anyway. So, and the problem is that the three of us, Oregon City really has the only place that can do any real development. So Gladstone, what do they care about the SDC? Because there's virtually less than 2% of Gladstone isn't built out, and Westland is very close to the same. So, this really seems to me to be a way for us to pay for the growth in Happy Valley.
That's exactly what it is.
That is what it is.
Well, and I think part of the difficulty is that, a capital improvement plan was adopted earlier this year. We have citizen representative on there. I think somehow that communication back to us needs to be better, or we need to be
Who is
there.
that?
It's Gifford.
William Gifford.
But the point is,
But I think the problem is that when they put together the capital improvement list, essentially the total cost for the SDC, their argument is, look, we're only charging $7,500. It could have been $12,000, right? So everything that got jammed that's in that list is just a significant cost. And so I think, somehow through the governance discussion, this ability to have communication.
this will be one of the cards we're going to play.
And Mr. Geis indicated that is, realized and, that a much better job could have been done, and that does have to happen.
Better than zero?
Well, but a lot of what we do, a lot of the methodology that we use, they're all the same. So if they do make changes to the methodology to address affordable housing, that's going to affect us as well as to what rate is collected, but it's also going to have to be collected somewhere else, so.
All right, moving on.
Do we have those already handed out? Okay, so on the dais before you is the update of the goals progress, January 1 through June 30th of 2019, as well as the goals booklet. So as you've gone through, we've adopted the goals for the biennium that we're currently in. Those are reflected on the handouts that you have, and then where we're at in that process to implementing those goals over the next 2 years.
Okay,
That's all that I have for tonight. Thank you.
all right. From the commission, Commissioner Smith, you got anything for us? Commissioner O'Donnell?
No, sir.
Commissioner Griff?
Oh, I've been going to lots of meetings on our behalf. I attended the Willamette Falls Heritage and Landings Area Coalition, that's their new name. And they had a meeting at the Historic Butteville store, and there was a lot of discussion with regard to the new name and what that meant, and they're embarking on a speaking schedule. I also attended my first DOCA meeting and promptly got volunteered for a couple of things, which is not unusual, but one of them's already done, so that's really good. Then on Saturday, I attended the Willamette Falls Trust review and question and answer session with Michelle Delk and Andrew Mason and Randy Gregg on Saturday at the Waverly Country Club. And that was very interesting and informative. Obviously, I had been through that presentation several times before, but you can always learn something new, and so it was really good. And then last but not least, I along with Commissioner Lyle Smith, attended the Clackamas Cities meeting is it Wednesday or Thursday?
Thursday.
And you know, as they say, preparation is 90% of doing something. So I had my rain jacket, I had correct shoes, I had an umbrella, and we did a tour of downtown Milwaukee in the pouring rain between 5:30 and 7:30. And it was very, I was dry, the other people weren't. It was very good. I had some good discussions with the City of Milwaukee City Commission and also with a commissioner from the City of Estacada. And I was happy to be able to attend, and thank you to Katie for reminding me that I needed to go to that.
Commissioner Smith?
Just want to thank the chief for the event at the Mount Pleasant. That was amazing. We were all there.
Yeah.
Huge turnout. It was a cool, very cool event.
Thank you. And I must say that apparently some of the demolition has,
It's moving.
has produced some movement in the rodent population, but the chief.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, jeez.
Is the chief on it?
So yes, the chief is on it. I got a
Wow,
call.
if you hear gunfire out there, you'll know.
I thought you were live
I'm just kidding.
I thought you were live trapping.
I got a call from
One
a
word,
constituent
suppressors.
when I was in Hawaii who said they had, you know,
Rats?
from this big to this big, you know, so anyway,
Wow.
he took care of that.
Are we talking about rats?
Rats,
Ooh, ouch.
but they've got it handled, so I'm not worried about it. The only thing I have, I did attend the police station groundbreaking, and I spent the last 5 days in Honolulu at the U.S. Conference of Mayors and got a bunch of really good information. And I do sit on the Mayor's Water Council, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, we have some of the best clean drinking water in the country. We have no possibility of losing any of our water rights, and we have no debt. And people look at me like I was a alien. So,
Right.
other than that,
Can I make a comment?
sure.
I forgot to mention the C4 retreat. That was held, it was a 1.5 day-ish event in Welch's. And we had Mr. Lewis and Ms. Turway attended both each one day. There was one day focused on transportation. The second day was focused on housing. So of course it was appropriate for each one to attend on their respective days. There was a lot of discussion about the vehicle registration fee and the revenue that will be generated by that and the distribution to all of the cities. Essentially for around Oregon City, I think we're looking at around $690,000. Where we will be able to use some funds based on those fees. The county will start sending notifications out about the increase in registration costs. That's going to start this November.
Right.
So our residents will start receiving notification of that increase in the registration fee. The other hot topic was road transfers, and I think that's a good topic for discussion. And I appreciate getting briefed on that from Mr. Lewis and Dana Webb prior to that so that I could participate in that conversation about the county trying to get cities to take on roads, which is essentially their goal, and they got plenty of pushback, I can say, from some of the cities that were there. So
Did you just say no?
they didn't ask us directly.
But you would
They
have
did
said
say that they would provide a list to all of us of, because there are apparently folks in the room who don't know. I got a briefing just beforehand by John Lewis so that I was more up to speed on how many county-owned roads were in the city limits that they would be interested in trying to get us to take on. But there were plenty of people in the room who weren't aware of how many miles of roads were in their jurisdiction that
Sure.
the county was asking cities to take on. And so,
And asking us to take it on without bringing it up to city standards first.
right. So, I was happy that Mr. Lewis was there and asked some good questions about that as far as the conditions of the roadways and stuff like that. So, and bringing them up to city standards versus county standards. So, lots of good conversations. The second day was housing, of course, and the Metro bond and housing money that's coming to Clackamas County. And I'll just leave it at that, but good meeting.
Okay.
May I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
So I had talked to Mr. Conkle about getting the county in here to do a presentation for us, since I attended their work session goal, whatever it was regarding housing, and I'm still not feeling very comfortable about how that money is going to be equitably divided up amongst the cities and the county. So I really would like to push us getting them in here so we can very nicely and politically correctly put them on the spot.
Well, and a adjunct to that is that Oregon City already has more low-income housing than any other city in
Exactly.
Clackamas County. And so I would be more than happy to have some of that money go to Lake Oswego and to West Lynn to build affordable housing in their cities, rather than just all of it be done here in Oregon City. With that, I do have one question, Laura.
Before you get there, remember we talked about fair share some years back?
Right.
With the cities being equitably having this housing distributed, so we didn't get it all on us. So that's a secondary part of that
Sure.
question.
I believe it was Miss Smith from, that was the presentation. She'll be here on the 17th.
On the 17th, okay, good, I'm glad it's scheduled.
Yeah, can I just say, the only thing the county said was that they, at that meeting, they are still working on a local implementation strategy for that. They'll say the county is expected to receive 116 million. And they did lay out areas in which the money could be applied. So building new affordable housing, purchase and rehabilitate existing housing, buy land for new affordable housing, and then creating homeownership programs. But they're still working on it.
Yeah,
I don't think that they have a real plan in place yet.
That's
It's
what I'm
early.
concerned about.
Yeah.
Well, but there's also the fact that the money's not even gonna start coming in for
Exactly.
almost
Right.
at least a year.
So-
year and a
Some
half.
time.
My question is, why don't we have a seat at the table to talk about whether we think those are the priorities?
But we
Or-
do have a seat at the table,
We
and
do?
that's why Mayor Holiday and I sit, I'm on the
No, I
C4
meant just for
subcommittee,
the
and he
specific
sits on
housing
C4.
thing.
Well,
If they're going-
it's gonna be dealt with at
C4,
C4 level.
okay.
So last question, either one of you guys know what's going on at Second High?
No.
You mean with the sidewalk there?
No, the building, the old building, I know they're re-roofing it, do we have any idea what they're doing?
You mean the one that was,
I have to get
Yeah.
back to you.
yeah, okay.
Okay, yeah, if you just send us a note and let
I
us
saw
know what's
that.
happening there. Obviously, they need a permit for the roof, so it'd be interesting to know what they did.
Dan, I thought that building was unable to be occupied.
I would have scraped it in a heartbeat. I can't imagine anybody's doing anything with it, but
Did you find out from the building official as well? I mean, that's part of it, but I thought it could not be occupied. I thought that it had been like flagged as uninhabitable.
only for the use.
Only for the
The
use.
building is, the four walls and the roof are probably structurally sound. You'd have to rip out almost everything in the interior, but
I've been in there, Dan.
Yeah.
It's depressing.
you weren't in there last time, it was me and the chief, and it was like awful. So with that, we were there. Where's your